Hello, my name is Amber and this is my October wrap-up, or sort of. So I gave myself an extension on the Magical Readathon in September, carrying it into October, and I've got a specific video for the wrap-up for that. So my October wrap-up pretty much only covers the second half of October, so that there's no crossover between my October wrap-up and my Magical Readathon wrap-up, if that makes sense. As I'm not sure I explained it very well, but anyway, here is what I read in the second half of October, and spoiler alert, it's not that much. The first book I read was Beck by Darren Shan. This is the fourth book in the Demonata series, which is a series centering around the people protecting the world from demons, with each book having a different main character. As a YA series, each main character is a teenager, and in the first and third book we follow Grubbs, whose family is murdered by demons. He is then taken in by his uncle and learns of the ongoing battle between humans and demons. In the second book we follow Colonel, whose brother is kidnapped by a demon. And in the fourth book, Beck, we travel back to the 5th century where Beck is a priestess in training. Now I don't know if I've mentioned this previously, but the majority of this series is set in Ireland, and while Beck is there, Ireland is being destroyed by demons. One day, a boy turns up at a village who can only say a few words, and he wants people to follow him. Assuming that he comes from a neighbouring village and that they might be in need of their help, or more likely are now beyond help, a small group, Beck amongst them, goes and follows him to this village in order to see what help they can offer. I felt that this was slightly weaker than the first 3 books, but not by much. It was still enjoyable, and I could see why child me really enjoyed this series, as this is a reread for me, but it was about 20 years ago that I first read the series, and I think I only read the first 4 or 5 books. So although I found that this was the weakest so far, it was also the only book that has made me cry so far, and I feel that this was because there was one particular character that I was more attached to. All the books in the series are linked together, but it did take me a little while to see how this one linked. Because it is set so far in the past, we don't really have any overlapping characters apart from Lord Loss, who is a demon lord, which means that he is more intelligent than the other demons and that he has some sort of control over them. I think that he is the big bad of the series and is probably who they have to defeat later on, although they have had a number of run-ins with him already. I also have a feeling that he is going to be in every book, as he is the only character who has been in all the books I've read so far. As I got further into the book, I started to see more links between this one and the rest of the series, and I feel that as we get further into the series, we'll probably see how each of the books are linked together even more. Well, I know that we'll find more links, as I accidentally googled something and saw a spoiler, so I am going to save any more googling or questions I have until the end of the series, so that I don't do that again. So like the rest of the series, this book has a high body count and plenty of gore, and it was just a fun time, if you are into that sort of thing. So I also read the next in the series, and that is Blood Beast. I rated this one 4 stars, which is higher than the last 3, but not as high as what I rated the first book. Actually, it's the same as what I rated the first book. So this one is back with Grubbs, and I'm only actually 80% sure that I read it previously, as I really didn't remember anything in it, apart from one of the main plot points, which was that Grubb believes that he might also be succumbing to the family curse. And in this book, he is trying to battle this. So most of this is set at home, and as well as the family curse, Grubbs is also battling between his friendship with Billy and his other friendships, as Billy doesn't really fit in with his other friends, and Grubbs feels some guilt around this, sometimes because he's not spending as much time with Billy as he used to, sometimes because he recognises that Billy is quite lonely, and also sometimes because of how his friends treat Billy. So he's sort of wrestling with this feeling of guilt throughout the book. I quite liked this less supernatural plotline, and I felt it was done well and that it was quite realistic. And I was also able to link it to aspects of my own childhood, though of course I'm looking at that retrospectively, and I don't know whether a child today would relate as much to this or not. There was less action in this book than in the rest of the series, but it did end with a huge cliffhanger that made me question why this was the last in the series that I read. But I think it was because I was reading them as they came out, and between Blood Beast coming out and the next book coming out, I got distracted by other books and never picked this series up again. Until now, of course. I am looking forward to continuing it now, and I'm less likely to stop this series partway through this time, as I don't have to wait over a year for the next one to come out, as I've got them all behind me. In fact, I think that one. So then I read Thief of Night by Holly Black. So this is the second and final book of the Charlatan duology. And again, as it's not the first in the series, it is hard to summarise what it's about without spoilers. And unlike with the Demon Arter series, it's hard for me to summarise the series as a whole, as when I started reading this, I realised there was very little of the previous book that I remembered. It kept mentioning things that happened, and I'm like, who's that? When did that happen? What was that about? But as I got further in, I started to remember more about what happened previously, and it started to make a bit more sense. So I will give it a go at summarising it. So the Charlatan duology is a urban fantasy. It's set in a world where shadows can be altered. They can be altered either cosmetically, or they can be altered to increase power and influence. They can also become separate to the person they're attached to, and can even become attached to someone different, and can act independently of the person they come from. So our main character is Charlie, and she is a con artist who is trying to put her former life behind her and is working as a bartender, but her former life isn't quite done with her, and she soon finds herself plunged into a crime world of shadow magic. And discussing The Thief of Night on its own is quite difficult, as I can't think of anything to say about this one that will not give spoilers for the first book, which is the Book of Night, I believe. But I really enjoyed both books. I gave them both 4 stars. The characters are great. Charlie is the sort of woman who gets constantly screwed over by life and will sometimes screw herself over instead for a nice change of pace. Her relationships with everyone around her are messy, but when you look at her history, you can clearly understand why. The magic system wasn't fully fleshed out, as there was a lot that we didn't know about it, but this actually lent itself to the story, as it was like a developing science where the characters in the book don't know everything about it and they're still discovering new things as the plot develops. I felt that Thief of Night rounded up the story well, though there were a couple of things I would have liked to have been explored further, such as with Charlie's relationship with her mum towards the end. So finally, I listened to the audiobook of The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. I really enjoyed this, as it gave a sense of something's not right throughout it, and I gave it 4 stars. So The Starving Saints is set in a castle under siege, where the food is starting to run out. It follows 3 protagonists. The first is Fosine, who is a former nun and is now a sorceress. She is known by many as the Mad Woman, but has previously saved the castle's inhabitants by developing a way to purify water, as they had run out of drinkable water. But now the king wants her to perform another miracle, which is to solve the food problem. And in order to try and speed this up, he tasks our next point of view, Savoyne, to be her minder. So Savoyne is not happy with this. She is a devout follower of the Constant Lady and her saints, and doesn't believe or trust in Fosine's sorcery. She also believes that she has more important tasks to be doing than following Fosine around, and that recently the king's been using her more as a show knight than a real knight. Then our final point of view is Trelia. She is a serving girl who wants one of 2 things, and that's either to escape the castle or to get revenge on Savoyne for what Savoyne did to her family. Then one day, when they are starting to discuss the possibility of cannibalism, the Constant Lady and her saints appear, despite there being no way in or out of the castle. With them, they bring a bounty of food, and soon the inhabitants are feasting. But something doesn't feel right. Where did the saints come from? Where did food come from? Is it a miracle? Or is there something more sinister going on? Well, it's a horror book, so you can probably guess the answer to that. It was a really engrossing read, or I guess listen, as I was listening to it on audiobook. I liked the setting, it felt quite oppressive, and I enjoyed watching the characters slowly unravelling what was happening and how they started to stop trusting anything, even each other. Although saying that, they didn't really trust each other at the beginning, but they started to trust each other even less. I did lose a little interest towards the end. I think this was because I was distracted rather than it being a problem with the book at all, but I can't really say for sure. So that is what I read in October, once I was done with my Magical Readathon reading. So I tried to read with Halloween in mind, which is why I read 3 horror books and a fantasy that involved blood and shadows. In my next wrap up, I should have more books to talk about, but also less books than in my Magical Readathon wrap up, which is a good thing as that video ended up quite long. I'm going to imagine that this video is going to be the opposite end and quite short, but I'll find out in the next few hours, I guess. So how did everyone's October go? Did you read anything specifically for Spooky Month? Let me know in the comments, and as always, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will catch you in the next one.